Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong simply because of the way you look? Imagine boarding a plane, ticket in hand, seat reserved, only to be humiliated in front of strangers. Now imagine the very person who insulted you, who slapped you, had no idea you owned the entire aircraft they worked on. What would you do in that moment? Would you shout back? Would you walk away? Or would you hold your ground and let the truth reveal itself? This is not just a story about a slap. It's a story about dignity, about power hidden in plain sight, about the quiet strength it takes to rise above cruelty and still demand justice. If it were you in that seat, how would you respond? Would you have the courage to stand firm, knowing the world was watching? Stay with me, because this story will challenge the way you see respect, prejudice, and power. And it might just remind you of a time when you too had to choose between silence and self-worth. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss stories that matter. The cabin lights glowed warm against polished mahogany panels. Leather seats shone with a faint gloss, the kind that comes only after hours of care. Most passengers were still settling in, sliding carry-ons into overhead bins, unfolding newspapers, tapping through phones. It could have been any flight out of Dallas Love Field, except for the hush of luxury that wrapped the jet in velvet quiet. Then a sharp voice sliced through. "Ma'am, I've told you once already," the flight attendant said, her tone carrying down the aisle. "If you don't move to the back, I'll have to call security right now." Heads turned. At the center of the storm sat a black woman in a navy blazer. A silk scarf knotted loosely around her neck. She didn't fidget. She didn't argue. She simply looked up at the woman standing over her, expression steady, eyes calm like deep water. Her name was Selina Carter. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I'm in my assigned seat," Selina said evenly, her words measured like a judge reading from the bench. Passengers nearby exchanged glances. They weren't sure what was happening, but they knew the tone of the flight attendant wasn't the tone she had used minutes earlier with the white couple across the aisle. With them, her voice had been sugar. With Selina, it was steel. Lauren Mitchell, the lead flight attendant, crossed her arms. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, each strand a soldier in formation. She wore the authority of 20 years in the sky, but her authority tonight had turned sharp, edged with something else assumption. "I know who belongs in first class," Lauren snapped, her lips tightening. "And it's not you." A gasp fluttered from the row behind. Clara Whitmore, a socialite in a pearl-buttoned cardigan, leaned closer to her husband and whispered just loud enough for others to catch. "Some people really will try anything for an upgrade." Selina didn't flinch. Her hands rested loosely on her lap, one thumb brushing against the edge of her boarding pass. She thought of how often moments like this unfolded on sidewalks, in stores, in lobbies, on flights. The stage changed, but the script stayed the same. From the opposite row, Michael Turner, a businessman with graying temples, folded his newspaper. He'd been on enough planes to recognize tension when it thickened the air. He shifted uncomfortably, debating whether to speak, then let silence win. Lauren tapped her foot against the carpet, impatient. "Last chance. Move now, or I'll bring security." Selina met her eyes. Her voice was low, almost gentle, but it carried, "Do what you have to do. I am not moving." The words hung there, quiet, but unshakable. For a heartbeat, the cabin froze. The sound of an overhead bin snapping shut echoed like a gavel. Somewhere toward the front, a phone chimed with a new message, then quickly stilled. Lauren exhaled sharply. She wasn't used to resistance. Usually, when her voice rose, people bent, but this woman didn't bend, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. Grace Holloway, a younger flight attendant, hovered nearby. She'd seen Lauren's tone change the moment Selina boarded. Grace had wanted to step in, but hierarchy was hierarchy, and Lauren was her supervisor. Still, the pit in her stomach told her something about this wasn't right. Selina adjusted the scarf at her neck. She thought about the trip ahead, New York, meetings stacked back to back, decisions that would ripple across markets. And yet, here she sat, treated like an intruder in the very seat she had paid for. The irony would have been bitter if not for the calm she had learned to carry like armor. Passengers waited, watching, caught between discomfort and curiosity. Some frowned in quiet disapproval. Others looked away, as if silence would keep them safe from the awkwardness settling like fog. Lauren leaned closer, lowering her voice, but not her bite. "If you make me call security, you'll regret it. Do you understand?" Selina's reply was soft, but it landed heavy. "Respect is not optional. It's the standard." Michael Turner heard it and blinked. He couldn't explain why, but he felt the sentence lodge somewhere deep, the kind of line that would echo later. Lauren, however, only tightened her jaw. She turned on her heel, muttering about passengers who didn't know their place. For now, the storm passed, but only on the surface. The cabin returned to its rustle of seatbelts clicking and bags shifting. Yet beneath, tension coiled tighter, waiting for the next spark. And everyone knew the spark would come. The hum of the jet's engines was steady now, a low vibration that pulsed beneath the polished cabin floor. Passengers were still finding their rhythm before takeoff, stowing bags, smoothing jackets, trading small talk that filled the air with the comfortable murmur of travel. For most, this was a routine journey. For a few, it was an indulgence, a chance to slip into the rarefied air of private class travel without lifting a finger. Selina Carter leaned back against her leather seat, the navy blazer folding neatly against her shoulders. She kept her breathing even, her posture relaxed, but her senses were awake, attuned to the small shifts around her. It was the way she had learned to live in boardrooms, in negotiations, and, all too often, in everyday spaces where she was treated as though she did not belong. Lauren Mitchell made her way down the aisle, heels clicking against the carpet, her eyes scanning the rows like a warden checking cells. Her smile appeared and disappeared depending on who looked up. For the Raymonds, an elderly couple in tailored travel wear, she leaned close, complimenting the woman's brooch. For the Whitmores, seated 3 rows back, she asked warmly about their vacation in Aspen. But when her gaze landed on Selina, her mouth tightened into a thin line, and she moved past without a word. Grace Holloway followed behind with the drink tray, her movements more hesitant, her smile less rehearsed. She stopped briefly beside Selina, meeting her eyes, as if silently acknowledging the slight she had just witnessed. But before she could speak, Lauren's sharp voice cut across the aisle. "Keep moving. Grace, we don't want to hold up the cabin." Grace flushed and stepped forward, the tray wobbling slightly in her hands. Michael Turner adjusted his cufflinks and watched the exchange. He'd flown enough to recognize patterns. There were always subtle cues, the tone of a greeting, the weight of a pause. What unsettled him was not only Lauren's sharpness, but Selina's stillness. That stillness wasn't weakness, it was something else. A composure that came from knowing your worth, even when the world tried to erase it. Clara Whitmore, across the aisle, leaned toward her husband again, whispering in that stage tone designed to be overheard. "I don't know why some people insist on making trouble. They should be grateful just to be on this plane." Selina turned a page in the book resting on her lap. She didn't lift her head, but the silence around her deepened, like a stone dropped into water that ripples outward. The flight attendant's voice returned, this time softer, but laced with sugar, meant for everyone else. "Mr. Raymond, Would you care for some sparkling water before we depart?" The old man nodded, folding his newspaper neatly and setting it aside. "Much obliged." "Lauren?" Selina let the words pass, though she noticed the pattern. Warmth extended one way, frost another. The contrast wasn't new. It was simply on display here, as obvious as sunlight pouring through the oval windows. Minutes later, the last passengers boarded. A young mother carried a toddler who fussed at the unfamiliar surroundings, his tiny fists clenching the air. Lauren bent instantly, cooing, her voice a melody. "Oh, aren't you just the sweetest little traveler?" She fetched a pillow, a blanket, a smile. Selina watched quietly, her expression unreadable. The safety announcements played, delivered by the co-pilot's calm baritone. Buckles clicked, phones were silenced, the jet rolled forward, the runway lines slipping beneath its wings. As the engines surged, Selina closed her eyes briefly, not to rest, but to anchor herself. She thought of the meeting waiting in New York, of the decisions lined up on her desk, each carrying weight measured in millions. She thought of the teams across 3 states who depended on her signature, her vision. But for this moment, she allowed herself a deep breath, steady and slow. The wheels lifted from the ground, and Dallas dropped away beneath them. When the seatbelt sign dimmed, Lauren was quick to resume her patrol. She adjusted trays, poured drinks, and checked in with the Whitmores twice in the span of 10 minutes. When she finally reached Selina's row, her steps slowed. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, her tone flat, almost grudging. "Yes," Selina said, her voice even. "Water, please." Lauren tilted the glass just enough for a droplet to slip over the rim before she set it down. "Careful," she murmured, though her eyes carried no apology. Selina accepted the glass, her fingers steady. She lifted it, took a slow sip, and set it back on the tray. She didn't wipe the droplet from her hand. She let it linger, a reminder of the exchange. Grace returned to collect empties. She glanced at Selina, then at Lauren, then back again, her unease plain. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but Lauren's shadow loomed close, and the words fell back down her throat. Michael Turner shifted in his seat, leaning closer across the aisle. His voice was low, but not so low it could be missed. "Excuse me, miss. Is everything all right?" Selina met his eyes. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself a small smile. "I'm fine. Thank you." Lauren's head snapped around. "Sir," she said sharply, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't encourage disruptions." Michael raised his eyebrows. "From where I'm sitting, she hasn't caused any disruption at all." The words landed with weight, rippling down the aisle. A few passengers shifted, some nodding faintly, others pretending to study their magazines. The socialite pursed her lips, displeased, but she said nothing this time. Selina's eyes softened toward Michael, gratitude flickering briefly before she returned to her calm composure. The plane hummed on, steady in the night sky. Drinks clinked, lights dimmed, conversation thinned to a hush. But beneath the calm, something had been set in motion, a current of unease, of resistance, of consequences gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Lauren moved briskly back toward the galley, her shoes tapping too hard against the carpet. She didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of passengers. Her jaw tightened, her pulse quickened. To her, authority was control, and control slipping meant respect slipping. She wouldn't allow that, not on her plane. Selina rested her book on the armrest, marking her page with the corner of the boarding pass. She wasn't naive. She knew this wasn't finished. People like Lauren never let go quietly. The jet cruised at 35,000 feet, slicing through clouds as though nothing on board could disturb its course. But in the rows of polished leather, power and prejudice had already collided, and the tremors would only grow. The hours stretched gently forward as the jet sailed above the clouds. A calm darkness pressed against the oval windows, stars glittering like frost in the distance. Inside, the cabin's glow carried the hush of a lounge-polite conversation, the clink of glasses, the rustle of magazines. To any outsider, it would have seemed ordinary, uneventful. But for Selina Carter, every small gesture was weighted. Lauren Mitchell had perfected the art of selective courtesy. She circled the cabin with her tray, pausing often to refill the Whitmore's champagne, adjusting a blanket for Mrs. Raymond, leaning in close to hear Clara Whitmore's story about a gallery in Santa Fe. She smiled, laughed, complimented. Then she passed by Selina without a glance. Selina noted it, but she did not break her calm. She'd lived long enough to recognize that silence was its own kind of violence. Still, she kept her shoulders squared, her eyes steady on the book in her lap. Grace Holloway's footsteps slowed each time she neared Selina's row. Once, she reached for the water pitcher, only to have Lauren's sharp whisper cut her off. "Not now. We have other priorities." Grace's lips pressed together, but she obeyed. Selina waited, patient, until her throat felt dry. At last she raised her hand slightly. "Excuse me. May I have some water?" Lauren turned, her tray half empty, her eyes narrowing. She set down a glass without a coaster, the liquid sloshing against the rim. "There. Try not to spill." The words carried just enough edge for the nearby passengers to hear. Michael Turner looked up from his tablet, frown deepening. Clara Whitmore tilted her head, pretending not to notice, though her smirk betrayed satisfaction. Selina's hand wrapped around the cool glass. She lifted it calmly, sipped, and set it back down. She spoke no retort, but her silence was pointed. Lauren, however, wasn't done. She returned moments later with the meal trays. She placed salmon and asparagus neatly before the Whitmores, beef tenderloin before Michael, then arrived at Selina's seat with only a half smile. "We're out of the chicken entree," she announced. "You'll have to take the vegetarian option." Selina glanced at the tray. The pasta sat congealed under a flimsy cover, steam escaping weakly. "That's fine," she replied, voice steady. Lauren placed it down a bit too hard, the fork clattering against the tray. "Enjoy." Michael shifted, his discomfort evident. "Funny," he muttered, more to himself than anyone. "I pre-ordered vegetarian and got beef without even asking." Lauren ignored him, sweeping away down the aisle. Selina lifted her fork. The pasta was lukewarm, the vegetables wilted. She chewed slowly, each bite deliberate, each swallow a quiet defiance. Across the aisle, Clara leaned in close to her husband. "Honestly, I don't know why she insists on staying up here. If she doesn't like how she's treated, she could move. It's that simple." Selina caught the words but didn't react. She had learned long ago that dignity was not a performance. It was a stance, steady as bedrock. Grace passed again, collecting empty trays. She lingered at Selina's row, her eyes soft with apology. "Would you like me to warm this up for you?" she asked in a whisper. Before Selina could answer, Lauren's voice cut in from behind. "Grace." "Now." The younger attendant's cheeks flushed, and she hurried away. The plane rocked gently in turbulence. A seatbelt sign blinked on. Lauren moved briskly to check straps, her movements clipped. When she reached Selina, she paused longer than necessary. "Make sure your bag is tucked under. We don't want anyone tripping," she said, her tone mocking. Selina glanced down, Her bag was already neatly stowed. She looked back up, meeting Lauren's eyes with a calm that unnerved. "It's been secure since we left Dallas," she said evenly. Lauren's jaw tightened. "Then keep it that way." She turned sharply, her heels clicking too loudly against the floor. The cabin had grown quieter, passengers pretending to sleep, though their ears remained sharp. Michael shifted again, finally breaking the silence. "Ms. Carter," he said gently, "you've been remarkably patient." Selina offered him a faint smile. Patience isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's survival. The words fell into the quiet like pebbles into still water. Michael nodded slowly, his respect deepening. Clara huffed, turning in her seat, unwilling to meet Selina's eyes. The minutes dragged into hours, the night sky thick and endless outside the windows. Selina folded her book closed, resting it on her lap, and allowed herself to breathe. Each moment of disrespect was another stone stacked onto the weight she carried, but she refused to bow. Lauren, on the other hand, was unraveling. Her authority felt fragile, chipped by Selina's unyielding calm. She needed to reassert herself, to remind the cabin who held power. And so, with subtle cruelty, she began to watch for the smallest opportunity. It came when Selina shifted slightly, stretching her leg into the aisle. It was a natural move, unthinking, the kind anyone would make after hours of sitting. Lauren approached with her tray. She could have asked politely for space. She could have stepped aside. Instead, she clipped Selina's leg with the corner of the tray, the glasses wobbling dangerously. Water spilled, splashing across Selina's slacks. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Lauren exclaimed, voice pitched high for the passengers to hear. "You really should watch where you put your legs. Now look at this mess." Gasps stirred in the cabin. Michael half rose from his seat. Clara leaned forward eagerly, her eyes wide with judgment. Selina looked down at the spreading water, then up at Lauren. Her hands brushed calmly at the droplets, her voice quiet but firm. "You walked into me. I have asked for nothing more than respect." Lauren's lips curled. "Respect is earned, sweetheart." The cabin went still. Even the toddler down the row quieted, as if sensing the weight of the words. Selina tilted her head slightly, her calm gaze unshaken. "Then perhaps you're the one who doesn't belong here." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into silence. Lauren's face flushed crimson. Her grip on the tray tightened. Her breath came quick. She leaned closer, her voice a hiss. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Before anyone could stop her, before Grace could speak, before Michael could rise fully from his seat. Lauren's hand struck out. The slap cracked through the cabin, sharp as a thunderclap. Selina's head turned slightly from the impact, but her posture did not break. She straightened slowly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes steady on Lauren. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Passengers froze, mouths open, disbelief written across their faces. Grace covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide in horror. Michael's chair creaked as he rose to his feet, fury burning across his expression. Even Clara, for once, had no words. Selina inhaled slowly, then exhaled, her voice calm as still water. "You've just made the worst mistake of your life." Her tone carried no anger, only certainty. And in that certainty, power shifted. Lauren blinked, her confidence faltering for the first time. She stepped back, tray trembling in her hands. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Selina's gaze did not waver. She did not raise her voice. She did not strike back. She simply held the silence until the weight of it pressed against every person in the cabin. The storm had broken, but the reckoning was only beginning. The sound of the slap still hung in the air, sharp and unforgettable, as if the cabin itself refused to breathe it away. For a long second, no one moved. The hum of the engines roared louder in the quiet, filling the silence like a reminder of how small they all were, sealed together in a tin tube 30,000 feet above the ground. Selina Carter sat perfectly still. Her cheek burned, but her composure never cracked. She folded her hands together, one thumb circling the other, a rhythm she had practiced in boardrooms when provoked by arrogance. She had endured far greater battles than this moment, though rarely had they been so brazen, so public. Michael Turner's chair screeched as he pushed himself fully upright. His voice trembled with disbelief. Did everyone just see that she struck her? A passenger, his words, loud enough to carry down the aisle, broke the silence like a stone through glass. Grace Holloway stood frozen in the aisle, her tray pressed against her chest. Her lips parted, but her voice failed. When she finally found it, it came out as a whisper. "Lauren, what have you done?" Lauren Mitchell's chest heaved. Her eyes darted left, right, searching for an anchor. For years, her authority in the cabin had been absolute. Her word had been law, yet now she felt the ground shift beneath her, the certainty she carried beginning to crumble. She tried to recover, her voice sharp. You all heard her. She was disrespectful. She provoked me. But the passengers weren't convinced. Heads shook, murmurs rippled. Mrs. Raymond clutched her husband's arm and whispered, "Unbelievable." Even Clara Whitmore, who only moments before had relished Selina's discomfort, looked unsettled, her lips pressed into a thin, doubtful line. Selina finally moved. She lifted her chin, turned slowly to face the cabin, and spoke not just to Lauren, but to everyone. Violence is never justified by disrespect. Violence is the refuge of someone who has already lost. Her voice was soft, yet it filled the space, each syllable deliberate, each word finding its mark. Michael nodded firmly. She's right. What I saw wasn't authority. It was abuse. Lauren's face reddened further. She spun toward Grace. "Back me up here." Grace shook her head, tears glinting in her eyes. "I can't. What happened was wrong." That admission drew a collective breath from the passengers. For the first time, someone inside the crew had broken ranks. Lauren's hands trembled on the tray. She set it down roughly on an empty seat and pressed her palms flat against her skirt, trying to steady herself. "Fine. I'll call the captain." She turned, marching toward the cockpit. Selina's voice followed her, calm but resonant. "Do that. Make sure you tell him everything." The tone carried weight, more command than suggestion. Some passengers tilted their heads, sensing authority in her words, though they didn't yet know the truth of who she was. As the door to the cockpit closed behind Lauren, the cabin exhaled as one. Murmurs rose louder now, no longer whispers, but fragments of conversation. Unbelievable. Never seen anything like it. She hit her right in front of us. Michael leaned closer to Selina, lowering his voice. "You should press charges. Don't let this pass." Selina gave him a small, appreciative nod. "I assure you, Mr. Turner, nothing about this will pass." Her calmness unnerved and reassured at once. Michael realized he had never met someone who carried such quiet certainty. It was the kind of composure that came only from power, real power, not the temporary authority of a uniform. Clara Whitmore cleared her throat, speaking for the first time since the slap. Perhaps we should all just stay calm. These things can spiral quickly." Selina turned to her, gaze unwavering. Spirals happen when silence covers the truth. Calm without accountability is just complicity. Clara's cheeks flushed. She turned away, fumbling with the clasp of her handbag. The cockpit door opened. Lauren re-emerged, her posture stiff, her lips tight. Behind her came Captain Daniel Reeves, tall, silver-haired. his uniform pristine. His expression was carefully neutral, the kind of neutrality built from decades of managing egos at 30,000 feet. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, his eyes moving across the passengers before settling on Selina. Michael was first to answer. "The problem, Captain, is that your lead flight attendant assaulted a passenger in front of all of us." The captain's brows lifted slightly, but he didn't let surprise break his practiced calm. He looked to Lauren. "Is this true?" Lauren bristled. "She provoked me. She questioned my authority, disrupted the cabin, and when I tried to restore order, Selina rose slowly to her feet, smooth and unhurried. The cabin seemed to tilt toward her, every eye following her movement. She was taller than most expected, her posture commanding. "Captain Reeves," she said evenly, "your attendant struck me. That is the fact. The rest is embellishment." The captain's gaze flicked between them. He cleared his throat. "Miss, perhaps if you return to your seat, we can address this after we land." Selina tilted her head, her voice cutting through his measured tone. "Would you be asking the same if she had struck you?" The question landed heavy. The captain faltered, his lips parting without reply. Passengers murmured, nodding faintly. Michael folded his arms, waiting for an answer. Selina continued, her voice low but unmistakably firm. "I am not returning to silence while an assault is brushed aside. If safety is your concern, then know this: the greatest threat to safety in this cabin is not me. It is unchecked abuse of power." The words struck deeper than the slap itself. Grace's eyes shone with tears, her admiration clear. Michael sat taller, emboldened. Even Clara's gaze wavered, the certainty in her disapproval cracking. The captain exhaled slowly, the weight of authority pressing on him. He turned to Lauren. "Step into the galley." "Now!" Lauren sputtered. "You're seriously—" "Now!" the captain repeated, sharper this time. Lauren's face drained of color. She turned and stalked toward the galley, her shoes biting against the carpet. Selina eased back into her seat, her hands folding neatly in her lap once more. She glanced around the cabin, her eyes meeting those of her fellow passengers. For the first time, they did not look away. They met her gaze, some with respect, some with shame, but all with recognition. The power in the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. Selina's cheeks still burned faintly, but inside, something stronger burned brighter. The moment was no longer about her alone. It was about every silent indignity she had endured, every time respect had been withheld. And this time, the reckoning would not wait for landing. The engines droned steadily, their hum a constant backdrop, but the cabin no longer felt steady. The slap had cracked more than silence, it had fractured trust, leaving everyone uneasy in their seats. Selina Carter sat composed, her back straight, hands resting gently on her lap. Her cheek carried a faint mark, though she seemed untouched by it. To the others, her calm was bewildering. How could she sit so still after being humiliated in front of a dozen strangers? Michael Turner still hadn't sat down fully. He hovered on the edge of his seat, restless energy pulsing through him. "I can't believe this happened," he muttered. 30 years of flying, and never once have I seen a crew member strike a passenger." Selina gave him a small nod, acknowledging his outrage but not feeding it. "What you saw," she said softly, "isn't rare. It just isn't usually witnessed." Her words sank in like slow rain. Michael felt the sting of them, realizing she wasn't only speaking of the cabin tonight, but of countless other places where eyes had turned away. Across the aisle, Clara Whitmore fidgeted with her pearl bracelet. Her earlier certainty, her casual disdain, seemed to have dissolved. She leaned toward her husband, but then hesitated. The words she might have spoken caught in her throat. For once, She wasn't sure which side of the story was safe to stand on. Grace Holloway lingered near the galley, her eyes darting toward Selina every few seconds. She wanted to offer something, an apology, a reassurance, but fear still tugged at her. Lauren Mitchell had been her supervisor for nearly a year, and she'd learned quickly how disobedience was punished. Yet now, the truth weighed heavier than fear. She took a tentative step toward Selina's row, her voice low. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need ice anything?" Selina looked up, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Grace. I'm fine." Grace's throat tightened. The kindness in those words, after what had just happened, unsettled her more than Lauren's anger ever had. She nodded, retreating slightly, but holding Selina's gaze a moment longer. Captain Daniel Reeves had returned to the cockpit, but his presence still hung over the cabin like a shadow. His decision to remove Lauren had not settled the unease. It had only paused it. Passengers whispered in clusters, some shaking their heads, others glancing nervously at the closed door. Michael finally lowered himself back into his seat. He pulled out his phone, tapped it awake, then froze. "No service," he muttered. He looked around at the others. Of course, mid-flight, no way to record this properly. Clara cleared her throat again, her voice tentative. "Perhaps that's for the best. Things like this can escalate if they go public." Selina turned her gaze toward her, her tone even but sharp enough to cut. Silence protects the one who harms, not the one who suffers. Clara flushed, her pearls clinking faintly as her hand trembled. She had no reply. The Raymonds, quiet since the beginning, exchanged a look. Mr. Raymond leaned forward slightly, his voice gravelly. "Young lady, what happened to you wasn't right. You have my word. If anyone asks, we'll speak it plain." Selina inclined her head. "Your witness matters more than you realize." For the next half hour, the cabin settled into uneasy quiet. Some pretended to sleep. Others stared out at the black sky, their thoughts restless. The air felt heavier, as if everyone knew something had shifted permanently, but didn't yet understand how. Selina closed her eyes briefly, not in retreat, but in focus. She thought of the irony. If any of them knew the truth that she wasn't simply a passenger, but the owner of the jet itself, the woman whose signature kept this company in the air, their silence would break in an instant. But revelation was timing. And timing, she knew, was everything. Grace gathered her courage and approached again, carrying a folded cloth napkin dampened with cool water. She leaned close, whispering so only Selina could hear, "Please, just hold this to your cheek. It'll help." Selina accepted it with quiet dignity. "You're kind, Grace." The younger woman blinked, caught off guard by the use of her name. She hadn't offered it. Somehow, Selina had noticed the name stitched into the corner of her badge earlier, when no one else ever cared to look. Grace's throat tightened again. She nodded quickly, retreating before emotion could betray her. Selina pressed the napkin gently to her skin. The sting eased slightly, though the memory of the strike would remain longer than any mark. Michael shifted once more. "I keep thinking about what she said, respect is earned. Can you imagine in her mind, it's something to be rationed out, as if dignity were a privilege?" Selina's voice was calm but edged with steel. "That is the oldest lie in the book. Respect is not a prize. It's the baseline, the starting point. Without it, everything else collapses." Michael nodded slowly, his jaw tight. He realized then that Selina wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for something larger, and every word carried the weight of someone used to shaping outcomes far beyond a single cabin. The lights dimmed further as the plane crossed into another time zone. Passengers shifted, some leaning against windows, others pulling blankets closer. Yet no one truly slept. They were all waiting, though none could name what for. Selina leaned back, her gaze fixed on the ceiling panel above. She thought of the meetings waiting in New York, the deals that would reshape markets, the people whose jobs depended on her decisions. And now, layered on top of it, the question of what to do with this moment. Expose it publicly, quietly reform from within, or something else entirely. The answer, she knew, would come soon. Near midnight, Captain Reeves' voice broke over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into New York. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." The announcement should have signaled routine. Instead, it pulled every passenger tighter into suspense. They all knew the real landing wouldn't happen at the runway. It would happen the moment the wheels touched down, when decisions would be made, truths revealed. Selina smoothed her blazer, folded the napkin neatly, and set it aside. Her composure was intact, her resolve sharpened. Grace moved quietly through the aisle, collecting stray cups. She paused at Selina's row, whispering again, "Whatever happens when we land, I just want you to know I'll tell the truth." Selina met her eyes with quiet warmth. That's all anyone can do. Grace. And it's more than most choose. The engines roared louder as the descent deepened. The city lights below began to shimmer faintly against the night, a sprawl of possibility and consequence waiting to be touched. Michael fastened his belt, his eyes still on Selina. He didn't know who she really was, but he knew one thing with certainty when they landed. The story wouldn't end. It would begin. Selina sat, poised, ready. The moment of revelation was coming, and the cabin would never forget it. The city below stretched like a net of stars. New York glimmered through the small windows, sharp lines of light against the darkness of the Atlantic. As the plane dipped lower, the cabin stirred awake. Seatbelts clicked, trays folded, the ordinary rituals of descent resumed, but the air carried none of its usual calm. Every passenger felt it, the weight of something unfinished, waiting just beyond touchdown. Selina Carter adjusted her scarf, smoothing the silk as though nothing at all had transpired. Her hands moved with care, steady, deliberate. Michael Turner glanced at her with a mix of awe and frustration. "You're calmer than the rest of us," he whispered. Selina gave him a faint smile. Calm isn't the absence of feeling. It's the decision not to let others dictate your ground. The wheels screeched against the runway, the jet bouncing slightly before settling into a rolling glide. Passengers leaned back as the brakes caught, their bodies pressing forward with the momentum. The engines thundered, then eased, pulling them slowly toward the terminal. And then, almost at once, voices rose. "Will security be waiting?" Clara Whitmore asked, her pearls trembling against her chest. Michael shot her a sharp look. Waiting for whom? For her. He gestured at Selina, his voice incredulous. "She's the victim." Clara flushed but didn't reply. Grace Holloway moved quietly down the aisle, checking belts, though her eyes betrayed her nerves. She leaned toward Selina as she passed. "They called ahead. Airport security will meet the plane." Selina's expression did not shift. She nodded once. "Thank you." Michael stiffened. "That's outrageous. She's the one who should be escorted off, not you." Before Selina could answer, the cockpit door opened. Lauren Mitchell emerged, her uniform crisp, but her face drawn tight. Her hair bun sagged slightly, strands slipping free. She wore her authority like cracked porcelain, trying to hold together something already broken. "The captain has contacted ground control," Lauren announced, her voice louder than necessary. "Security will board to handle this matter appropriately." Her gaze swept the cabin, daring anyone to challenge her. But Michael rose to his feet, appropriately. You struck a passenger, in front of all of us. If anyone needs to be escorted out, it's you. A ripple of agreement moved through the cabin. Mr. Raymond added his gravelly voice. That's right, we saw it plain. Lauren's jaw tightened. Passengers are often confused about what they see. Emotions distort things. Not this time, Michael snapped. Selina finally spoke, her tone level, each word landing like stone. Lauren, you are not protecting order. You are protecting yourself. But truth doesn't bend that way. Her calmness unsettled Lauren more than anger ever could. She faltered, then recovered, lifting her chin. We'll let security decide. The plane slowed to a halt at the gate. Outside the windows, the terminal lights glared harsh and white. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a sharp chime. The cabin door opened, and two security officers stepped inside. Their Navy uniforms were crisp, their radios crackling faintly. The taller of the two spoke first. We received a report of a disturbance involving a passenger. Lauren pointed instantly toward Selina. That's her, Seat 2C. She was disruptive, disrespectful, threatened crew authority. Michael barked a laugh. Bitter. She left out the part where she slapped her. The officer frowned, slapped her. He turned toward Selina. Ma'am, is this true? Selina rose gracefully to her feet. She stood taller than the officer expected, her presence commanding. It is true, she said calmly, but not in the way you were told. Grace stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice clear. She's telling the truth. I saw it. The lead attendant struck her without cause. The entire cabin saw it. The Raymonds nodded in unison. We'll testify to that, Mr. Raymond said firmly. Clara hesitated, then finally raised her hand. I saw it too. It happened exactly as they said. Lauren's face drained of color. You're all misinterpreting, she provoked. The officer raised a hand, silencing her. Enough. We'll sort this out. Ma'am, he said to Selina, would you like to file a formal complaint? Selina met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. Not a complaint. A record. The officer blinked, unsure how to respond. Michael leaned forward. She means she'll take this higher. And believe me, she can. The second officer glanced between them, sensing the tension. All right, we'll escort both parties off the plane for statements. Lauren seized on the words. Good. She should be removed. Selina's lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I don't need an escort. This is my aircraft. The cabin froze. Lauren's eyes widened. What did you just say? Selina reached into her blazer pocket and withdrew a slim leather wallet. From it, she pulled a silver-embossed identification card bearing the logo of Aurelia Jets. She held it up. Steady. My name is Selina Carter. I am the owner and chief executive of Aurelia Jets. This plane, its crew, its routes, its contracts, all of it operates under my authority. Gasps erupted. Michael's jaw dropped, then broke into a grin of vindication. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Clara's pearls clattered as her hand fell limp against her chest. Even the officers stepped back, caught off guard. Selina's voice remained even, each syllable deliberate. I boarded this flight in silence, choosing to experience what any passenger might. What I received was humiliation, neglect, and violence. And you, Lauren Mitchell, delivered it. Lauren staggered back, her face pale. You can't be serious. Selina's eyes held hers, unflinching, deadly serious. The cabin erupted into murmurs. Michael clapped a hand against his seat, laughing once in disbelief. Well, there it is. You slapped the boss.
Lauren's breath came short, shallow. She looked around, searching for an ally, but found none. Grace stepped closer to Selena, her voice trembling but resolute. "Everything she said is true, and I'll testify to it." Selena nodded at her, gratitude flickering in her eyes. Then she turned back to the officers. "Escort her, not me. She assaulted a passenger and endangered the safety of this cabin. That is gross misconduct, and it ends tonight." The taller officer hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes, ma'am." He stepped toward Lauren. "You'll come with us." Lauren's voice cracked, frantic. "Wait, you can't do this. I've been loyal 20 years. I kept order. I followed protocol." Selena's reply was quiet, almost tender, but it cut deeper than any shout. Order built on disrespect is not order. It's tyranny, and protocol never permits violence. The officers took Lauren by the arms, guiding her toward the exit. Her protests echoed down the jet bridge, fading as the door shut behind her. Silence returned, thick and stunned. Selena turned back to the passengers. Her gaze swept the cabin, meeting each set of eyes. You all witnessed what happened, not just the slap, but the silence before it. Every silence is a choice. Remember that. Michael placed a hand over his heart, nodding deeply. Grace wiped at her eyes, overwhelmed. Clara bowed her head, shame coloring her cheeks. The Raymonds sat straighter, pride in their expressions. Selena picked up her bag with measured grace. She didn't hurry. She didn't gloat. She simply carried herself like what she was the owner, the authority, the one who would not be moved. The cabin door opened once more, and she stepped onto the jet bridge, leaving behind an air thick with awe and the beginning of a story that would not stay contained inside the fuselage. The moment Selena Carter stepped onto the jet bridge, the air shifted. Cameras waited like hungry eyes, flashes already bursting against the glass as words spread faster than footsteps. Passengers exiting behind her fumbled with their phones, uploading shaky clips that captured the slap, the confrontation, the reveal. Within minutes, hashtags sprouted across social feeds. "Yar respect on board. Selena Carter. Slap the billionaire." Outside, the terminal hummed like a hive. Reporters had rushed to Gate C7 after whispers of a disturbance involving a high-profile passenger. By the time Selena emerged, flanked by her assistants, microphones jutted toward her like a forest of metal stems.
"Miss Carter, did a flight attendant really strike you? Are you pressing charges? What message do you have for travelers who have experienced discrimination?" The questions tumbled over one another, chaotic, insistent. Selena paused at the threshold, the harsh terminal lights washing over her face. Her posture remained unshaken, shoulders squared, chin lifted. She lifted one hand, not in dismissal, but in quiet command. The noise ebbed, reporters leaning forward for a word. "My statement is simple," she began, her voice low but resonant, carrying through the crowd without strain. "Respect is not optional. It is not earned by status, nor withdrawn because of prejudice. Every passenger, every person deserves dignity." The room hushed. Even the buzz of rolling suitcases seemed to fade. A reporter near the front pushed forward. "But, Miss Carter, aren't you the owner of Aurelia Jets? Does that change how this should be seen?" Selena's lips curved faintly. "Yes, I own this airline. But ownership did not shield me today. That is the point. If this can happen to me, imagine how many others endure it without witness, without recourse. That ends now." The cameras clicked like thunder. Behind her, Michael Turner emerged, his tie slightly askew, his voice booming as he addressed the cluster of microphones. "I saw everything." She was calm, dignified. The attendant. She was the one who escalated, who struck her. "Don't twist this. Put the blame where it belongs." The Raymonds nodded vigorously, adding their voices. She spoke truth. We were there. We'll testify if need be. Grace Holloway lingered at the edge, clutching her tablet to her chest. When a reporter spotted her uniform and beckoned, she froze. But Selina turned, meeting her eyes with a steady gaze, a silent permission. Grace stepped forward, voice soft but clear. I work this crew. I saw the slap. And I want to say Miss Carter never raised her voice. She only asked for the respect given to every other passenger. That's the truth. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Reporters typed furiously, broadcasting headlines before Selina had even left the concourse. Airport security formed a perimeter, guiding Selina toward a waiting SUV. Yet even inside the tinted glass, she could see screens lighting up with her face, snippets of video replaying in loops. Lauren Mitchell's hand striking her cheek. Selina's calm words. You just made the worst mistake of your life. By the time the convoy pulled onto the freeway, the story was no longer local. News alerts pinged across the nation. Flight attendant slaps, black woman unaware. She was the CEO. Cable anchors dissected shaky footage, voices raised with disbelief. Morning shows reran the clip. Social commentators weighed in. Hashtags climbed trending lists like wildfire. Inside the vehicle, Selina's assistant, Daniel Cross, scrolled furiously through a tablet. We're at 4. 2 million views in less than an hour. CNN wants you tonight. NBC is calling. Social media's demanding a statement. Selina leaned back against the leather seat, the city lights flickering past. She closed her eyes briefly, not from weariness, but to gather her thoughts. Draft a holding statement, she instructed calmly. Something simple, unpolished. This isn't about spin, it's about truth. Daniel nodded, fingers moving fast. What tone, dignity? Selina replied, always dignity. Michael Turner, who had insisted on riding along, chuckled from across the seat. You realize you're about to set the internet on fire. People don't forget a moment like that. Selina opened her eyes, her expression steady. Good. Then let them remember for the right reasons. Hours later, as night settled over Manhattan, Selina appeared in a studio for a live interview. The host introduced her with solemn weight. Tonight, we speak with Selina Carter, CEO of Aurelia Jets, who was at the center of an incident that's already gone viral worldwide. Selina sat poised beneath the studio lights, the faint mark of the slap still visible against her skin. But if it pained her, she showed no sign. The interviewer leaned forward. Miss Carter, millions have seen the footage. What do you want people to understand from this moment? Selina's gaze held the camera, steady and unflinching. That respect is a right, not a privilege. Today it was me. Tomorrow it could be you, your mother, your child. Dignity is not something we earn by wealth or appearance. It is owed to us as human beings. The host hesitated, visibly moved, and to those who say this was just one bad employee, Selina shook her head. Systems allow silence. Passengers stayed quiet until the slap echoed loud enough. Crew feared speaking out. That silence is complicity. Change requires more than one firing. It requires a culture where dignity is non-negotiable. Viewers across the country leaned closer to their screens, many nodding in their living rooms, others wiping tears as the words resonated. Social media buzzed with reactions. She speaks for all of us. I've been there. I've felt that silence. In airports nationwide, travelers huddled around monitors broadcasting the interview. Some clapped softly when Selina said, "Luxury isn't the leather seat or the champagne glass. It's how we treat the person beside us. True success is measured by respect." By midnight, Aurelia Jets board convened an emergency session. They issued a statement aligning fully behind Selina. Our CEO endured what no passenger should. Effective immediately.
We are implementing reforms to guarantee dignity on every flight. But the public already knew whose voice had defined the moment. It wasn't corporate press releases or polished PR. It was Selina Carter herself, calm, unyielding, and deeply human. As the night drew on, Selina sat alone in her apartment overlooking the skyline. The city glimmered below. Unaware of the weight she carried, she touched her cheek lightly, then exhaled. This was no longer about her alone. It was about everyone who had ever been told to move, to shrink, to disappear. And she knew this was only the beginning. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the city below. Selina Carter stood by the window, her reflection a shadow against the skyline. For the first time that day, she allowed her hand to linger against her cheek, feeling the faint sting that remained like a ghost of the slap. She wasn't reliving the pain, she was remembering the silence that followed it, the stunned faces, the weight of unspoken truths. On the coffee table, her phone vibrated constantly, alerts stacking with the persistence of waves hitting shore. Messages of support flooded in from fellow CEOs, community leaders, even celebrities who had shared their own stories of humiliation in first-class cabins or marble-floored lobbies. A text from her mentor, retired Judge Eleanor Hughes, stood out history knocks rarely. You have the choice to open the door or pretend you don't hear it. Choose well, Selina. Selina closed her eyes, the judge's words circling in her thoughts. She had always been deliberate, not reactive. Building Aurelia jets had taken decades of restraint, calculation, and patience. But tonight felt different. Tonight wasn't about a business empire. It was about a wound too many carried in silence. Daniel Cross, her assistant, returned from the kitchen with a steaming mug of chamomile tea. You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be heavier than today. Selina accepted the mug, but didn't sip. Do you feel it? Daniel. The noise out there isn't just outrage, it's recognition. People see themselves in this moment. He sat across from her, the glow of his tablet lighting his tired face. They do. Hashtags are multiplying, trending across multiple countries. But here's the risk: you'll be pulled in every direction. Civil rights groups, airlines, regulators, politicians, they'll all want you to stand with them, for them. We need a strategy before dawn. Selina set the mug down. Then, let's begin. No reactionary moves. This isn't about vengeance, it's about vision. She walked to her study, a warm space lined with books and maps of flight routes. At the center, a large oak table held a spread of documents, contracts, and photographs from Aurelia's history. She pulled a notepad closer and drew a line down the center. On one side, she wrote the slap. On the other, the shift. Everything begins here, she said quietly. One act of disrespect, magnified. But on the other side, we choose what it becomes. Daniel leaned forward. So, what's the shift? Selina's pen moved quickly. Structural reform. Not just at Aurelia Jets, but industry-wide. Protocols for dignity, training that sticks. Systems that protect voices like Grace's so she doesn't tremble before speaking truth. Passenger charters with teeth, not just slogans on glossy brochures. Her eyes flickered with determination. I want this slap to end more than careers. I want it to end the culture that allowed silence to echo louder than truth. Daniel exhaled slowly. That's massive. Selina, we'll need allies, investors, regulators, and we'll get them, she replied. But first, we need a blueprint that people can believe in. One built not on outrage, but on hope. The following morning, Selina convened her inner circle at Aurelia's headquarters. The glass tower shimmered in the dawn. Reporters already camped outside, their lenses aimed upward like watchful eyes. Inside the boardroom, tension hung thick as executives whispered, some clearly rattled, others defensive.
Richard Hale, the chief financial officer, cleared his throat as Selina entered. Selina, before we begin, I just want to say this whole thing is unfortunate. But it was one employee. Surely we don't risk destabilizing the company over one incident. Selina placed her leather folder on the table, her gaze steady. One incident. Richard, did you watch the footage? Did you hear the silence from passengers until the cameras rolled? This wasn't one incident. It was a mirror. And it reflected more than Lauren Mitchell's hand. It reflected us. The room quieted. She opened the folder, revealing printouts of messages pouring in overnight. Thousands of people wrote about their own stories. A black father denied boarding because the gate agent didn't believe his first-class ticket. A Latina nurse forced to the back of the cabin after a white passenger complained. An Asian professor questioned for ID repeatedly on the same flight. This isn't isolated. It's systemic. The chief operating officer, Margaret Lynn, nodded slowly. She's right. We've ignored the whispers for too long. This moment, it's a reckoning. Selina leaned forward, her voice steady but charged. So here's what we do, effective immediately. Aurelia Jets will ground all flights for 48 hours. During that time, every crew member, every gate agent, every manager will undergo dignity and bias training. Not a slideshow, real immersive training designed to confront the blind spots we pretend don't exist. Gasps filled the room. Richard Hale blanched. Grounding the fleet. That's hundreds of millions lost. Selina didn't flinch. Lost revenue is recoverable. Lost trust is not. If we don't do this now, others will force it on us later. Better we lead than follow. She turned to Daniel. Draft the announcement. Simple, honest, no corporate polish. Margaret interjected. What about Lauren Mitchell? Selina's jaw tightened. She's already terminated. Legal will pursue assault charges. But make no mistake, this isn't about one person. It's about the system that gave her permission to believe she could act that way. As the meeting broke, murmurs filled the corridors. Some executives bristled at the cost, but others felt a stirring of pride. For once, Aurelia Jets wasn't chasing image, it was seizing integrity. By afternoon, the announcement went live, effective immediately. Aurelia Jets will pause operations for 48 hours to implement comprehensive dignity reforms. We apologize not only to our CEO, but to every passenger who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or disrespected. Respect is not optional. It is the core of who we are moving forward. The internet roared. Some critics decried the shutdown as a publicity stunt, but countless others praised the boldness, flooding social feeds with messages. Finally, an airline taking real action. That evening, Selina met with Grace Holloway in her office. The young flight attendant's hands trembled as she clutched a folded resignation letter. I think I should step down, Grace whispered. I didn't stop her. I froze. And Selina rose from behind her desk, crossing the room slowly. She placed a hand gently over Grace's. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Grace. It's speaking despite it. You told the truth when it mattered. That's more than most. Grace's eyes filled with tears. But what if they target me? What if I'm blacklisted? Then Aurelia will protect you, Selina assured. And more than that, you'll help us design the new system. You've seen where it fails. Now help us build where it stands strong. Grace blinked, stunned. Me. But I'm just... Selina smiled softly. You're not just anything. You're the kind of voice this reform needs. The young woman left the office lighter than when she entered, her resignation letter crumpled in her pocket. Selina returned to her desk, exhaustion tugging at her, but resolve anchoring her deeper. She thought of Judge Hughes's words, "History knocks, rarely." Tonight. Selina Carter wasn't just answering the door, she was opening it wide. The skyline glittered outside, but in Selina's eyes it wasn't lights she saw. It was the silhouettes of countless passengers who had ever been silenced, displaced, dismissed. This reform wasn't just for Aurelia, it was for them, and she vowed it would not be lip service. It would be legacy. The morning after Aurelia Jets announced its unprecedented 48-hour grounding, the aviation industry jolted awake. News tickers scrolled across every screen: airline CEO grounds fleet after assault incident. Analysts debated the economic fallout while activists praised the courage. The Federal Aviation Administration called an emergency session, regulators demanding details, shareholders demanding explanations. Selina Carter sat at the head of the conference table as investigators from both federal regulators and Aurelia's independent compliance team entered the boardroom. Their expressions were sharp, pens poised over notebooks. "Ms. Carter," began lead investigator Thomas Yates, "we want to establish a clear timeline, from the boarding process until the moment of disembarkation." Selina folded her hands calmly. "You'll have full cooperation. Every passenger has been contacted, and we've secured footage from multiple angles. I want transparency, nothing hidden." Daniel Cross slid folders across the table, neatly labeled witness statements, crew logs, cabin footage. Inside, accounts from Michael Turner, the Raymonds, and Grace Holloway aligned with the viral video. Each detail built a damning case. Yates adjusted his glasses. "So, to be clear, the flight attendant initiated physical contact, unprovoked, and the captain failed to intervene appropriately." Selina nodded. "Yes." And the silence of surrounding crew members reflects a culture of fear. That silence is as dangerous as the slap. Grace Holloway sat quietly in the corner, summoned as part of the testimony. Her hand shook until Selina gave her a reassuring glance, with renewed steadiness. Grace described the moment Lauren Mitchell raised her hand, the gasp in the cabin, and her own paralysis before finally speaking the truth. "It wasn't just the slap," Grace whispered. "It was the feeling that if I spoke, I'd lose everything. That's the culture we live in." The investigators scribbled notes furiously. Meanwhile, outside Aurelia's tower, the media frenzy escalated. Protesters gathered with signs reading, "Respect takes flight and no more silent skies." Others carried placards with images of Selina's composed face beside the words, "Dignity is a right." Cable news vans lined the street, commentators delivering live updates from the sidewalk. In Washington, senators weighed in. Senator Alvarez called Aurelia's response a bold template for corporate accountability. Senator Whitmore, by contrast, derided the move as grandstanding, drawing backlash from constituents who accused him of minimizing discrimination. Civil rights organizations flooded Aurelia with offers to collaborate on reform, while rival airlines scrambled to issue their own statements. Delta promised a review of bias training. United announced an internal audit, yet critics dismissed their pledges as too little, too late compared to Aurelia's sweeping action. For the first time in decades, the industry looked less like a collection of competitors and more like a stage on which Aurelia had claimed the spotlight. Selina, however, avoided the noise. She convened a task force with regulators, passenger advocates, and her internal team. The mission: create what she called the Passenger Dignity Charter. "This isn't branding," she told the group. "This is blueprint. Every word must mean something actionable. If a child, a mother, a business traveler feels unsafe or unseen, this charter should protect them." The meetings stretched long into the evenings. Lawyers argued over enforceability. Regulators worried about precedent. while activists demanded concrete timelines. Selina listened, absorbing every voice, then distilled the noise into clarity. "We will build accountability into the system," she declared. "Anonymous reporting channels for crew and passengers, independent audits every quarter, consequences that are public, not buried in HR files." The phrase public consequences unsettled some executives, but Selina pressed on. "Quiet discipline is how problems rot. Visibility is accountability. We will show our work." As the task force drafted language, news outlets continued their relentless coverage. The slap video had been replayed millions of times, dissected frame by frame, from the twitch of Lauren Mitchell's jaw to the calm intensity of Selina's response. Talk shows invited psychologists to discuss why humiliation cuts so deep, sociologists to analyze systemic bias in air travel, historians to link the moment to past struggles for civil rights. For many, the slap became symbolic, a single hand carrying centuries of weight. Meanwhile, Lauren Mitchell herself was placed on administrative leave pending formal termination. Through her lawyer, she issued a brief statement. "I regret what happened, but I was under stress." The public rejected the excuse. Her name trended for days, often paired with ridicule, anger, and calls for accountability. Captain Reynolds, who had failed to intervene, faced scrutiny as well. His silence became a symbol of complicity. Investigators discovered he had received prior complaints of dismissing passengers of color. Those files, once buried, were now dragged into daylight. He was suspended indefinitely. The investigation widened, uncovering a pattern of minor complaints ignored over the years. Selina felt a heavy mix of anger and vindication. "This is what silence breeds," she told Margaret Lynn during one late-night debrief. "Not one slap, but 1,000 smaller wounds that never heal." Margaret nodded, and now everyone is finally watching. As pressure mounted, Aurelia's stock fluctuated wildly. Some investors panicked, but others doubled down, believing Selina's bold reforms would pay off in the long run. "This is integrity capital," one analyst wrote, "and it may prove more valuable than any quarterly gain." Through it all, Selina remained steady. She appeared at town halls with employees, facing tough questions without flinching. When one veteran pilot asked, "Why punish all of us for one crew member's mistake?" she responded firmly, "Because silence isn't neutral. If you saw it and said nothing, you became part of it. We must all share responsibility. This is not punishment, it's rebirth." Her words reverberated across the company. Some resisted, but many felt a quiet stirring of pride. For the first time, they believed they worked not just for an airline, but for a principle. By the end of the second week, the FAA announced it would partner with Aurelia to pilot new anti-bias protocols across the industry. Lawmakers proposed the Passenger Dignity Act, inspired directly by Selina's reforms. Commentators called it the most significant civil rights moment in air travel since desegregation. Selina, however, kept her focus grounded. In a late-night message to Judge Hughes, she wrote, "This isn't victory, it's responsibility. I feel the weight, but I also see the possibility. Thank you for reminding me to open the door." The judge's reply came minutes later, and "Thank you for walking through it." As autumn leaves began to scatter across city streets, the investigation reached its conclusion. The report was blunt systemic failures, ignored complaints, inadequate training, a culture of silence. Recommendations included sweeping reforms, most of which Aurelia had already begun. At the press conference, Thomas Yates held the report high. The incident involving Ms. Carter was not isolated. It was inevitable given the system in place. But Aurelia's response demonstrates what accountability looks like. Other airlines should take note. The cameras turned to Selina.
She stepped forward, composed as always. This is not the end of a scandal. This is the beginning of a standard, and we invite every airline to join us not in slogans, but in actions. The room erupted in applause, reporters shouting follow-up questions, but Selena's message had already landed. Somewhere in the crowd, Grace Holloway watched quietly, pride swelling in her chest. She had gone from trembling in silence to standing within history's current. Selena met her eyes, offering the smallest nod. A silent promise. You are part of this shift. We all are. The grand ballroom of the Conrad Hotel in Midtown Manhattan shimmered with crystal chandeliers and the buzz of anticipation. Rows of reporters, activists, airline executives, and government officials filled the space, their murmurs weaving into a low hum. At the front of the room stood a polished podium flanked by banners bearing Aurelia's new motto, "Dignity takes flight." Selena Carter stepped up to the microphone. She wore no flashy jewelry, no ornamentation, just a simple black suit, her presence commanding without effort. As the flashes erupted, she raised a hand lightly, and the room stilled. 2 weeks ago, she began. A moment on an airplane revealed a truth far larger than one slap. It revealed how silence can normalize harm, how prejudice can hide in plain sight, and how dignity, the simplest human expectation, can be denied. She paused, scanning the audience. Today, we answer with more than words. We answer with action. Behind her, a massive screen illuminated with the title Passenger Dignity Charter. Selena's voice carried weight, but also warmth. This charter establishes the rights of every passenger, rights that are non-negotiable. The right to be treated with respect regardless of race, gender, class, or status. The right to report misconduct without fear. The right to transparency in how complaints are handled. The right to consequences when dignity is denied. Applause rippled through the crowd. Some journalists leaned forward, scribbling furiously. "And this is not confined to Aurelia jets," she continued. "We call on every airline to adopt these standards. We will publish our audits quarterly. We will share our training methods freely. This is not about competitive advantage. It is about moral responsibility." The ovation grew louder. Grace Holloway, seated near the front, felt her chest tighten with pride. A month ago, she had been a trembling attendant, afraid to speak. Now she was watching the company's CEO turn her fear into a national movement, but not everyone clapped. At the back of the ballroom, representatives from rival airlines whispered among themselves, their expressions sharp with calculation. Within hours, resistance surfaced. The Airline Trade Association issued a terse statement. While Aurelia Jet's intentions are commendable, grounding fleets and imposing public audits is impractical and risks destabilizing the industry. We caution against performative measures. Senator Whitmore, already a critic, appeared on a cable talk show declaring, "This is corporate overreach disguised as virtue. Airlines should focus on safety and profitability, not social engineering." The backlash rolled in waves. Editorials accused Selena of weaponizing victimhood for branding. Anonymous online campaigns smeared her past, dredging up old photographs and questioning her leadership style. Selena read the headlines late into the night, the glow of her laptop painting her features in cold light. Daniel Cross entered quietly, placing a stack of supportive letters on her desk. "Don't let the noise drown the signal," he said softly. "For every attack, there are 10 stories of gratitude. People are writing about their own humiliations on planes. They're thanking you for giving them a voice." Selena closed the laptop slowly. "I knew resistance would come, but the venom, it's still sobering."
Margaret Lynn joined them, carrying fresh reports. Investors are nervous. Stock dipped 4% today. But look at the social metrics. Customer loyalty indicators are surging. People are pledging to fly Aurelia exclusively because of this charter. Selina absorbed the data, her face unreadable. Then she exhaled. Good. That means this fight isn't just symbolic, it's sustainable. The next day, she traveled to Washington to testify before the Senate Commerce Committee. The hearing room brimmed with cameras, senators seated in a semicircle like arbiters of fate. Selina sat poised at the witness table, the charter displayed beside her in crisp binders. "Ms. Carter," began Senator Alvarez, his tone respectful, "you've initiated the boldest reform in aviation since deregulation. Why should this body consider expanding your charter into law?" Selina met his gaze steadily. "Because voluntary dignity is fragile. One company can lead, but only law can level the sky. No passenger should depend on luck or brand loyalty to know they'll be treated with humanity. It must be a guarantee." Senator Whitmore leaned forward, voice laced with skepticism. "Isn't this just a stunt grounding your fleet cost shareholders millions? What would you say to pensioners whose retirement depends on that stock?" Selina didn't flinch. "I would tell them their investment is safer now than ever. Because a company that ignores systemic injustice builds on sand. We are pouring a foundation of trust. That trust is worth more than any quarter's profit." The hearing room buzzed. Some senators frowned, others nodded with quiet approval. Outside, protesters gathered, chanting slogans of support, while industry lobbyists whispered urgently in back hallways. That evening, Selina returned to New York exhausted but resolute. In the privacy of her office, she stared at the city lights and reflected. She had chosen this path knowing it would cost her ease, perhaps even allies. But she remembered Judge Hughes's words, "History knocks rarely." She wasn't about to close the door. The resistance escalated further when an anonymous memo leaked, allegedly from a group of Aurelia pilots. It criticized the reforms as distracting from core safety concerns and accused Selina of bowing to political pressure. The media seized on the leak, portraying a company divided. Selina convened an emergency meeting with the pilots' union. In a tense exchange, one captain stood and challenged her directly. "We signed up to fly planes, not play politics. Why should we risk our careers for a social agenda?" Her reply was calm, yet cutting. "You risk your careers more by flying in silence, because one scandal, one video, can end more than a career. It can end public trust in all of us. Dignity is not separate from safety. A crew that cannot respect its passengers cannot be trusted with their lives." The room fell into a heavy silence. Slowly, some pilots nodded, realization dawning. Others crossed their arms, unconvinced, but the seed had been planted. Meanwhile, ordinary travelers responded with overwhelming support. Letters poured in from single mothers, disabled veterans, immigrant families, all sharing stories of mistreatment in the air. A retired teacher wrote, "I thought it was just me when I was asked to prove I belonged in first class. Thank you for proving it wasn't my imagination, it was their prejudice." Selina read each letter late at night, sometimes with tears, sometimes with clenched fists. They became her fuel, her armor against the resistance. As autumn deepened, Aurelia jets relaunched operations with a charter fully in place. Passengers noticed the difference. Crew members greeted them with sincerity. Reporting channels were visible on screens, and flight updates included reminders of the Dignity Pledge. Surveys showed unprecedented spikes in customer satisfaction. Yet, for every step forward, pushback remained. Rivals lobbied regulators to water down proposed legislation. Opinion pieces questioned whether dignity could truly be measured. Industry forums whispered about Aurelia's dangerous precedent. Selina knew the road ahead was long, but she also knew something had shifted irrevocably. She had turned a slap into a standard, an insult into an industry-wide conversation, and once that conversation began, it could not be silenced. Late one evening, as she prepared to leave the office, Grace Holloway knocked timidly and entered. She carried a stack of training feedback forms. "Look at this," Grace said, smiling for the first time in weeks. "Crew members are saying the sessions are changing how they see passengers and themselves. Some even thanked me for sharing my story." Selina took the forms, her eyes softening. "This is what it's about. Grace. Not headlines, not hearings. People changing, culture shifting." Grace hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you ever regret pushing so hard with all the resistance?" Selina looked out the window at the city glowing against the night. "Regret," she shook her head slowly. "No." Because resistance means we're pressing where it hurts, and healing never begins without pain. Winter descended on New York with biting winds, but inside Aurelia's headquarters, warmth hummed with the energy of change. It had been 3 months since the Passenger Dignity Charter launched, and already the effects rippled far beyond the company's balance sheets. Surveys showed a 30% increase in customer loyalty. Complaints of bias dropped sharply, replaced by notes of gratitude. Passengers shared stories online, a wheelchair user describing how crew members now offered assistance with respect rather than impatience. A Muslim family who felt welcomed instead of scrutinized. A black mother who boarded first class without anyone questioning if she belonged. Yet the true test came internationally. In London, a consortium of European carriers invited Selina Carter to speak at their annual aviation summit. The Grand Hall was lined with flags, the air thick with skepticism. Executives whispered about the American experiment and whether it could survive outside its home market. When Selina stepped to the podium, she carried no notes. Her words flowed with the quiet authority of someone who lived the change she spoke of. "You may call this an experiment," she began, her tone calm but firm. "But let me ask you, when did treating passengers with dignity become experimental? When did respect become optional?" The hall fell silent. Even those predisposed to dismiss her leaned forward. "We grounded our planes for 48 hours. Selina continued. "Yes, it cost us millions, but what we gained is priceless trust, and trust flies farther than any fleet. It crosses borders without visas. It fills cabins with loyalty that no competitor can purchase." By the end of her address, applause thundered. Some executives remained reluctant, but the tide had shifted. A German airline announced pilot programs adopting Aurelia's training modules. A Japanese carrier requested consultations. For the first time, reform was no longer contained. It was contagious. Back in the United States, lawmakers advanced the Passenger Dignity Act. Hearings stretched late into the night, filled with testimony from passengers who shared their humiliations. The bill gained bipartisan traction, though not without fierce resistance from industry lobbyists. Selina found herself traveling constantly, from Capitol Hill to grassroots town halls, explaining not only the cost, but the value of systemic respect. The toll began to show. Late one evening, in her penthouse overlooking the Hudson, Selina sat slumped in an armchair. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't surrounded by advisors or flashing cameras. Just silence. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion weighing heavily. Her phone buzzed. It was a video message from her niece, Maya, a college freshman, the screen lit with the girl's beaming smile. "Auntie Selina, I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. My classmates were talking about you today. They said, that's the woman who didn't let them push her out of her seat.
And I thought, yeah, that's my aunt. You gave me courage to speak up in class when someone dismissed me. So, thank you. Tears welled in Selena's eyes. She hadn't realized how deeply her fight echoed within her own family. For months, she had carried the burden like armor. But in that moment, it became something softer legacy. The next morning, challenges resumed. A coalition of rival airlines filed a lawsuit claiming Aurelia's public audits constituted defamation of the industry. The story dominated headlines. Competitors accuse Aurelia of overreach. Selena convened her legal team, who braced her for a long battle. Margaret Lynn, the COO, voiced concern. They want to drag you into endless litigation, tie up resources, make reform look like a liability. Selena remained composed. Then we fight. Not because we want to win against them, but because losing would mean passengers lose too. Even as courts prepared hearings, something unexpected happened. Travelers boycotted rival airlines, flocking to Aurelia in solidarity. Hashtags like "Fly with Dignity" trended globally. Some celebrities announced they would only book Aurelia for tours. The competitors' lawsuit backfired, painting them as villains resisting basic humanity. Still, the pressure mounted personally. Death threats appeared in Selena's inbox. Anonymous callers whispered vile slurs before hanging up. Security details shadowed her, a reminder that leadership came with danger. One evening, Daniel Cross found her staring out the office window long after midnight. "You can't carry this alone forever," he said gently. Selena turned, her eyes weary but unwavering. "I don't carry it alone. Every passenger who writes to us, every employee who dares to speak truth, they carry it with me. That's why I can keep going." Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's make sure you don't forget to breathe while you're saving the skies." Spring brought both renewal and escalation. The Passenger Dignity Act passed the House of Representatives, sparking jubilation among activists. Airlines across Canada, Brazil, and South Africa announced alignment with Aurelia's standards. Global momentum surged, but the opposition dug in deeper. Industry giants pooled resources to launch a PR campaign painting Aurelia as unstable and Selena as radical. Billboards appeared with slogans like "Safety First," "Not Politics," implicitly targeting her reforms. Selena countered not with ads, but with presence. She flew economy class unannounced, mingling with passengers, listening to their stories. One young mother told her, "I used to dread flying because of the stairs. Now it feels different. People treat me like I belong." Selena smiled softly. "You do belong. Always." Word of her humility spread. Passengers posted selfies with her mid-flight, captions praising her willingness to listen. While competitors spent millions on campaigns, Selena built loyalty one conversation at a time. Amid the whirlwind, she faced her deepest test yet. Judge Eleanor Hughes, her mentor, fell gravely ill. Selena visited her in the hospital, sitting quietly by her bedside. The judge's voice was frail but resolute. "You've carried the torch further than I ever dreamed," Hughes whispered. "But remember, even torches need tending. Don't let the fire consume you." Selena clasped her mentor's hand, tears streaking silently. "I'll carry it carefully, I promise." The judge passed weeks later, and Selena delivered the eulogy. Her words blended grief with gratitude. She taught me that dignity isn't a luxury, it's justice in everyday clothing. I will keep building until skies everywhere carry that justice. The funeral became a gathering of activists, leaders, and ordinary citizens, all bound by the vision Hughes had instilled and Selena now carried forward. By summer, Aurelia's reforms had reached a tipping point. The lawsuit against the company faltered, judges dismissing it as unfounded. Rival airlines, under pressure from both public opinion and lawmakers, reluctantly began adopting similar policies. What began as resistance turned into reluctant compliance. Selina watched the shift with quiet pride, but also sober clarity. Change was never swift or complete. There would always be resistance, always backlash, but the trajectory was set. In a private letter to Maya, she wrote, "This fight isn't glamorous, it's exhausting, and it's lonely at times. But when I see the way you stand taller in your own life, I know every battle is worth it. That is what legacy means. Not statues or headlines, but courage passed forward." One evening, as she prepared for yet another international summit, Grace Holloway entered her office, now more confident than ever. She placed a binder on Selina's desk. "These are stories from crew members," Grace said. "They wanted you to know the culture's changing. They feel freer to speak up, to protect passengers, to protect each other. They said to thank you." Selina opened the binder, scanning the handwritten notes, the sketches, the heartfelt words. She closed it gently, her heart swelling. "Then thank them," she said softly, "because this only works if everyone carries it. Dignity can't belong to one woman, it must belong to us all." Autumn in Washington carried a crispness that sharpened every sound. The Capitol dome gleamed against a clear sky as Selina Carter stepped into the chamber for the final vote on the Passenger Dignity Act. Cameras flashed, reporters surged, and ordinary citizens filled the galleries. Some clutched handmade signs reading, "Respect is a right," while others wore buttons with Aurelia's golden wings. Selina didn't need to speak. Her presence alone had become a statement. The bill passed with a resounding majority. Cheers erupted, echoing through marble halls, spilling into the streets. For the first time, federal law codified what Selina had fought for on that turbulent flight. Every passenger deserved dignity, regardless of race, class, or appearance. Outside, the crowd swelled. Strangers embraced. Elderly travelers lifted their canes high in celebration. Children perched on their parents' shoulders waved flags. Reporters pushed forward, their questions tumbling over each other, but Selina lifted a hand. "This isn't my victory," she said, her voice steady. "It's ours. It belongs to every person who has ever been told they don't belong. It belongs to the voices that refused silence." In the weeks that followed, the impact spread like sunrise.
Airlines across the globe adopted the Act's standards, not just under compulsion, but under pressure from passengers who demanded better. Airports introduced bias reporting systems. Crew training became immersive, focused not only on safety, but on empathy. What once seemed like a radical dream was now daily practice. But amid the triumph, Selina faced her own quiet reckoning. One evening, alone in her penthouse, she replayed footage from that fateful flight. The slap, the gasps, the silence that followed. She studied her own expression in those frames, calm, composed, unyielding. It struck her how easily she could have shouted back, escalated, lost control. Instead, she had chosen restraint. That choice had changed everything. She whispered into the stillness. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to move. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Grace Holloway, now promoted to Director of Crew Culture. Grace had written, "Today I intervened when a supervisor dismissed a passenger's concern. I remembered your words. Dignity is the standard. I stood my ground, and the situation de-escalated. Thank you for teaching me to trust my voice." Selina smiled, her chest tightening with pride. Grace had transformed from hesitant witness into bold leader.
That was the legacy she cherished most, not the laws or the headlines, but the courage multiplied through others. Months later, Aurelia hosted a global summit in New York. Delegates from more than 50 countries gathered under one roof. The stage was framed by banners reading, "Respect above all." Selena walked on stage to a standing ovation. Yet the moment wasn't about applause. It was about reflection. She spoke plainly, without flourish. "We began with one seat, one slap, one injustice," she said, "but injustice never stays contained. It multiplies unless confronted."
Today, we are choosing confrontation not with fists or fury, but with policies, with accountability, with compassion. The skies do not belong to prejudice. They belong to everyone. The audience rose, clapping until the hall shook. Delegates signed a joint pledge to adopt Aurelia's model. A new international standard was born, but perhaps the most unexpected moment came not from politicians or executives, but from a voice in the crowd. Clara Whitmore, the socialite who once muttered insults on that flight, approached the microphone during the open forum. She was trembling, eyes wet. "I was wrong," she said simply. "I judged you without knowing you. That day on the plane, I contributed to your humiliation. Watching what you've built since then has forced me to look at myself. I can't undo my words, but I can change my actions. Today, I've pledged $10 million to scholarships for underrepresented youth in aviation. It's the least I can do." The hall fell silent, then erupted in applause. Selena walked over, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Redemption," she said quietly, "is just as powerful as reform." That night, Selena returned home exhausted, but filled with hope. Daniel Cross handed her a letter, its envelope embossed with the seal of the White House. She opened it carefully. Inside was an invitation the president would be awarding her the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions to civil rights and aviation reform. Tears blurred her vision. She had never sought medals, but she knew what it meant not for her, but for every person who had ever been told to move to the back, to sit down, to be quiet. The ceremony came weeks later, standing in the East Room, sunlight filtering through tall windows. Selena accepted the medal with grace. Cameras captured the moment, but her eyes searched for one face. Maya stood near the front, tears streaming freely. When their eyes met, Maya mouthed, "You did it." Selena shook her head softly. "We did it." As the applause faded, Selena addressed the room. "This medal is not mine alone. It belongs to every person who chose dignity over silence, every passenger who refused to be invisible, every worker who spoke truth to power. May it remind us that respect is not a luxury, it is justice in motion." After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the crisp air. Reporters shouted questions, crowds chanted her name, but for a moment she tuned it all out. She looked up at the sky, streaked with the contrails of planes climbing into the blue. They seemed endless, weaving a tapestry of connection. Selena whispered to herself, "The skies are free now." In the years that followed, the movement continued to grow. Passenger dignity became as fundamental as seatbelts. Other industries, from hospitality to healthcare, adopted Aurelia's model. Her story was taught in business schools, debated in law classes, and retold at dinner tables. But in her heart, Selena kept the memory of that first quiet refusal. Not the medal, not the headlines, just the moment she looked a prejudiced woman in the eye and said, "I'm not moving." That stillness had ignited a fire the world could not extinguish. On her final flight as acting CEO before stepping back into an advisory role, Selena sat by the window as the plane ascended into golden light. A little girl across the aisle leaned over and whispered, "Are you the lady who made planes kinder?" Selena chuckled softly. "I suppose I am,
The child grinned. Thank you. Now I'm not scared to fly anymore. Selina turned toward the window, the horizon stretching infinite and bright. Her heart swelled with a quiet triumph. Change had come, not because she fought with anger, but because she stood with unshakable calm. And in that calm, the world found its courage. Life often tests us in unexpected places. On that flight, a woman endured public humiliation, yet she responded not with anger, but with calm strength. Her story teaches us that dignity is not something others grant. It is something we must claim for ourselves, even in the face of cruelty. For older generations who have seen injustice in many forms, this truth is familiar. We know the sting of being overlooked, underestimated, or disrespected. But we also know the quiet resilience that comes from standing tall, even when the world tries to push us down. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Our worth is never determined by another's prejudice. We cannot control how others act, but we can choose how we respond. A calm voice can carry more weight than a loud insult. A steady presence can shift the course of an entire room. So when life confronts you with disrespect, remember this story. Choose dignity. Choose calm strength. Because in the end, those choices don't just protect your pride, they can inspire change for everyone watching. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like these remind us why respect and dignity matter in every corner of life. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to light and together. We can spread the message of justice, compassion, and hope.